being free. Everybody wants to be free, right? What does it actually mean to be free from the spiritual standpoint? That includes awakening to the next level of consciousness. Watch this video and find out. Alright, being free. Freedom is something that everybody always asks me for. I've been working with people for over 25 years, and this is one of probably the most common desires that I hear. Oh, I just wish I was free. Free from something, or free to do something. So this is obviously an issue in the human condition. So let's look at why. Okay, when somebody's talking about, I want to be free, I want to not have to do something, or I want to be able to do something, or I want to be free to internally think or feel or experience something certain way, but instead I'm not. And this is how we sort of register that, oh, I'm not free because I cannot something. So this is because the perception of what we label freedom inside the human consciousness range of the lower 3D earth has been very much wrapped up with the ego perception. We are not talking about freedom from the spiritual higher self, all universal, amazing perspective. We're talking about freedom as what ego wants. So when people say, I want to be free, most of the time what is meant is I want to be able to do whatever the hell I want, which usually means ego or the lower self. Because in reality, every single event in our lives is there because we put it there. Why do we do so? Because this is how we grow and learn. If there is something that's occurring that is difficult for us, even painful, that is hard to kind of carry that belief that, oh, I put it there for myself. But we still do as a way to wake up from the soul perspective. It's just the personality from the lower view looking up is not seeing it the same way as the soul from the top looking down. So what we want to do is to really clean up our issues with freedom in order to make room for the spiritual concept of freedom. Otherwise, we forever will feel stuck and limited. And the lower self will always feel like, oh, I have to do something that I don't want to do. And then ego will go with that, and then we will feel oppressed and trapped and all sorts of perceptions that we end up in that are self-limiting, right? So, one of the most detrimental results of this freedom being attached to ego as a concept is the fact that when we are sort of activated by the soul to the next level of perception, which often means next level of behavior, the ego in the lower self sees that as the parent over there is making me do something that I don't want to do. And then we end up in rebellion to our own higher self energy and our own soul. And with that rebellion, guess what happens? Self-sabotage. So then we end up with the soul is still bigger and stronger than the ego, right? So the soul is still creating the charge that says, all right, time to move on into this new level of consciousness, which means here is your lesson. Like it or not, it's gonna be happening until you learn it, right? Because this is how we move on in awakening. But then the ego says, but I don't want to have to do this. I feel oppressed by the soul over there that's making me do stuff. Because that means I have to change something. I have to change the way I think, the way I feel. I have to change how I behave. And all my thinking and feeling and behaviors are attached to my way of believing life to be. The ego-based perceptional lens through which we're looking at the world. So then the ego essentially is saying, I don't want to have to change my perceptional lens. I just want to look at the world the way that I'm looking at the world. And anybody who's making me do something else is my enemy, essentially. And we then push against what the soul is bringing to us, which soul is actually trying to create a next level of freedom for us, the entity. inside this simulation on the planet Earth. But the entity from the avatar perspective, from the ego inside the simulation, seeing that as something that is limiting it, and then the result is self-sabotaging sort of mechanisms that lead to experience of, first of all, entrapment. So all of you who felt trapped in your life, that's why. From the soul level, if we know that every single thing that happens in our lifetime is for our benefit, and it's our job to either evolve through it and then change it, or evolve through it and change our perception to it, if for some reason the thing itself could not be changed. But pretty much we're free from that level. But if we don't see it as such, we end up feeling trapped. So this is one of the main sort of results of it. And another is the one that I mentioned already, is the self-sabotage. Self-sabotage means that you end up with creating the same lesson over and over and over again, right? This is not because soul, wants to punish you or something. Soul is loving and kind and always wants to awaken the avatar inside the game of this simulation on a planet Earth. But the avatar itself doesn't know that, doesn't want to believe that, and instead ends up with resistance. And when we resist, the lesson happens again and again and again. So that's another negative. So you can see how this sort of response inside our systems of the sabotage and repetitive negative event or behavior and the entrapment, limitation, perception become then the experience of not feeling free. But none of this actually occurred from the soul level. All of that perception was sort of cooked up on our own within the personality, within the ego and the lower self. So, now let's look at the bigger view of freedom. First of all, every entity in the universe is automatically, by its definition of being part of God's source, is free. There is no not free, because God's source is free. So all universal oneness, interpenetrating universal intelligence, all of that is free. It's free to create, it's free to experience anything that is. It's free to comprehend it depending on the level of consciousness that that particular entity has. When we put ourselves in a limited parameters, when a soul incarnates into a particular, simulation environment, different planet somewhere in the galaxy, or this planet, doesn't matter. But any simulation is a limitation of perception in order to learn. Sort of like a classroom that you come into in order to figure something out. You have to put the rest of your knowledge sort of aside in order to learn a new technique. So this simulation planet Earth has a duality and separation as one of the things, and individuality as another that we're learning here. So souls that come here want to comprehend that. Now, once we are inside the limitation, we often lose the link to the higher perception memory. And because of that, we end up with this separation as the only perception. Like this lifetime, I remain connected, so I have this bridge, this link in my consciousness from birth. It never got disconnected at birth, but for most people, it does. And it's sort of supposed to, as part of, in order to learn, it's supposed to happen. Like I'm an anomaly in this, but I have a different mission, so that's why I have that. But for most people, it's actually supposed to happen that we kind of fall asleep when we get born. But then we're supposed to wake up. And that's the part that tends to not happen. So then the reincarnation goes on and on and on with the entity not waking up. That's the problem. Because that condition of repetitive, not awake personality, just recycling karmic patterns, ends up creating this very experience of not being free, of being trapped, of feeling limited. So the spiritual view is that we are always free, but we are free to experience and learn from whatever is occurring. Not whatever the hell we want to occur, but whatever is occurring. That means that we are actually perceiving the universe in a non-attached way. from the soul perception, we are always detached. And being detached means that as life occurring, we learn and interact with it, and then our comprehension of the event and non-attachment brings to us, attracts to us, different experiences. That's how soul creates. The way that the personality, the avatar inside the game, wants to create, it's sort of a twisted, mutated version of creative process. And that looks like, I want this to happen, so I'm going to go and make it happen. If it's part of my learning, I don't care. If it's going to benefit my awakening, I don't care. If it's going to hurt somebody, for some people even that, I don't care. If it's going to hurt the planet, for some people that too, I don't care. I just want it to happen my way. That is a selfish perspective based on separation. In oneness, that does not exist. So if we want to upgrade our freedom perception from the limited view of the ego and a lower self inside the simulation to an expanded true sense of freedom from the soul and the higher self, we need to let go of attachments to the outcome, attachments of what we want to experience. It's good to know what you want to experience because that's the individuality. But knowing what you want and making it happen or fixating on it having to be this way is not the same thing. Knowing what you would like, that's a preference. That's like stating to the whole universe that, hey, this is what I would like to happen. This feels like it would be really interesting and fun to experience and will deepen who I am and whatever. And maybe I just didn't have that experience before, so I really would like to have it. No problem. But I'm open to the possibilities. I'm open that the universe might come up with something way better than whatever I have envisioned. Or that the way for me to learn what I just stated and proclaimed I would like to learn would be very different than from the way I have come up with. That's preference. That's good. When we go into the demand energy, which is more about, I have to have it this way, and if I don't, then I'm not good enough. Or I refuse to blah, blah, blah. Or I can't love myself if I did not achieve this. And millions of other things that we come up with as the way to self-punish if we have not arrived at whatever we have demanded the universe to provide us with. That is how we create absence of freedom instead of freedom. So in application of basic material stuff, it would be like, oh, I'm having this job and I don't want to have this job. I want to have some other job where I will feel more free because I can travel around the world. When it's perhaps possible for that person to actually be brave and choose to change the job to some other job that will allow them to have that experience. There's always risk. There's always going to be some difficulty. It's not going to be perfect. But it's going to be maybe more of the experience they want. But they would have to risk. They would have to dare to do something different. If they don't want to and they just wanted to show up differently, they will probably be stuck with the job they're having. But the job they're having because it's part of what their soul put in their past as a component of what they need to learn. So the faster they learn from it, the faster they can move on to the life that they think they want to be living, which might look like what they imagine or might not at all. Or if someone says, I really don't want to have to feel this way anymore. I feel like such a victim of my circumstances. My mother didn't love me. My father abused me. Okay, that is true. That is horrible when that happens. And we all have our personal painful stories. But those stories are meant to be components of us comprehending something and moving to the next level of consciousness. Sometimes they're ways that we play out karmic patterns. There are always reasons as to why something occurs. But when we see ourselves as victims of it, then we forget that there is a reason for existence of that negative event in our life. And then the story becomes the future. We essentially create who we are based on what has happened to us in the past, instead of what is our experience. Experience is what you can change, because experience is determined by your perception. And events, they're not determined by your perception. They're determined by circumstances coming together. It's like a giant puzzle that comes together based on all sorts of patterns. Morphogenic fields that you belong to, karmic patterns that you carry, genetics, upbringing, social beliefs, whatever your personal developmental needs are that the soul would put you in the circumstances. We don't control that. What we do control is how we see that. And depending on how much learning we're doing inside the circumstance, it moves us out of it to something else that is much more expanded perception. That is true freedom. To be able to not be attached to the events, to the material external representation that either is happening, we think will be happening, or has happened already. But to be able to be in control of our own perception, learn from it, know what we desire, put it out there in the universe, and with excitement watch what we're creating. But we're creating it by attracting it to us based on our perception, instead of us willing it into existence, which would be the lower perception of freedom. So hopefully this gives you a much clearer understanding of how to be free, and you can begin today. Be more free in your life. And if you're watching this video on anything other than my Transcension Gate website, please visit. There's all sorts of information there on freedom, on consciousness, on morphogenic field, on pretty much everything, lower self, higher self, anything I mentioned today, and much more. And you can get support from Guardian Kadishtu and from myself on your personal spiritual journey. And make sure you sign in for my email list so that you don't miss any updates. Be love. Be free. Be God.